the Amer-Israeli World War Epstein that we've been talking about for the past week is finally here. It's happening. America and Israel last night struck Iran, the nation state of Iran with 93 million population. America and Israel have officially launched an attack on Iran, and there's still motherfuckers out here who will be like, oh my God. Like, I saw a news hit on NPR talking about how Jean-Luc Mélenchon said Epstein, and in France they're talking about how anti-Semitic it is that Jean-Luc Mélenchon said Epstein. Like, I need people to get fucking serious right now. Okay? I need people to get fucking serious. Conversations surrounding, like, the utilization of the term goyim. Conversations around, you know, how American feelings are going to be hurt in this process. Conversations around standpoint epistemology about how the Persian monarchists feel about striking a totally fucking foreign sovereign country with 93 million people. All of those conversations are utterly immaterial, utterly irrelevant. I am not going to give any room for dumb fucking bullshit like that today. Let's be real. From the perspective of anyone that's living in the periphery, America and Israel are basically the great Satan, right? Like, I live here. I'm an American citizen. I'm a dual citizen as an American and Turkish citizen. But like, you kind of look at what we have done around the world, and you start developing certain feelings.
It's been barely a day after the latest round of indirect nuclear talks between Iran and the U.S., and sources tell CNN the U.S. military is planning for these attacks to last for days. Israel said the same, and both President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are now calling for regime change.
To the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take.
Every single Gulf country is being hammered currently that have American bases that are being hammered fucking currently and presently. They are destroying billions of dollars of American equipment inside of American bases. I've seen videos in Bahrain of even Shahed drones blowing up the American base. Shahed drones can be shot down with an AK-47. That's how little America gives a shit about its goddamn assets in the region. If you wanted to, if you're wondering what the situation looks like, Shahed drones are so fucking slow, you can shoot them down with an AK-47. And they're currently striking American bases in Bahrain. The naval base in Bahrain is being struck. Okay? Iranian drone hits the vicinity of Burj Khalifa in Dubai. The IRGC has officially announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. The economy about to buckle. Inshallah, the economy will buckle. These people that lead these countries are fucking animals. Do you understand? They're animals. They do not care about you. We are going to suffer as a consequence of their actions, but they only fucking respond. They only respond to force. They only respond to military deterrence. They only respond to pressure. And it's literally, we have to be the pressure. We have to be the pressure. We have to take it to the streets. We have to fucking protest. We have to put an end to this kind of action. We have to demand an end, sever ties with Israel. We have to demand an end to American imperialism. It's done. Okay? It's done. There is no other way out of this. All right. Jeremy Scahill's in the building. Jeremy Scahill of Drop Site is in the building. Esteemed guest. Welcome back, Jeremy. Unfortunately, every single time we have you on, it always feels like the world is collapsing right in front of our eyes. But it's still an honor to have you on nonetheless. Can you hear me?
Thank you for having me back.
Of course. You guys, you just got done with your reporting. I believe you're in contact with some officials on the Iranian side, and Dropsite just revealed a couple hours ago, or your latest reporting shows, a very different perspective than what we're seeing in mainstream media. But I know you're paying close attention to what's going on in the news. Let's get started with the I guess now almost 50-year project of Israel finally coming to a close. Do you feel like there's any argument that you've heard so far that made you go, maybe this is a real reason for why we're going to war with Iran?
No, and I think it has to be stated at the beginning, just from an American perspective, that we've seen this coming for weeks and weeks, that Trump was going to move forward on this. And, at Dropsite, we've been reporting on things that we've heard even from people within the inner circle. And one of the things we reported recently is that Trump has been kind of stomping around, even in internal briefings, making statements like, I'm going to go down as the president that forever changed the Iranian regime, and obsessively talking about the 79 revolution and the seizure of the embassy. And they've been, this whole thing started on its surface in mid-January after the protests in Iran that then converted into very bloody battles and attacks in the streets of Tehran and other cities around. Trump seized on that moment in Iran and said, help is on the way. And of course, the utterly discredited son of the deposed Shah also was calling on Iranians to rise up and seize institutions. And then nothing happened in the immediate aftermath of that. And then Trump basically almost entirely stopped talking about Iran is brutal toward its own citizens and they're massacring their own citizens. He was obsessively claiming that he had stopped all of these public hangings. But they basically dispensed with that, and then they resumed this talk about nuclear weapons. And, every U.S. national intelligence estimate going back years had concluded that toward the end of 2003, Iran had given up its nuclear weapons ambitions. And then in June, Trump conducted all of these strikes over 12 days on the three main nuclear sites in Iran. And then they said that they had completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear program. In fact, they created a special web page on the White House website to preemptively declare as fake news anyone that would dare to say otherwise. And then last weekend, we had Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy. He and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, Witkoff makes like a Dick Cheney style statement and says, Iran is a week away from having industrial grade bomb making material. And they provided no evidence for that whatsoever. But it also sort of was like, well, wait a minute, you either totally obliterated the program or it's gotten so advanced that they're a week away from it. So they start obsessing about this nuclear thing. They're supposedly in negotiations again. Just what happened last year in June happened now, which is that they claim they were going to have another round of technical talks in Vienna, Austria on Monday. The Omani foreign minister last night was with Vice President J.D. Vance and said that the prospects for a deal are very serious. And then, people wake up this morning to news that the United States and Israel have launched massive bombing at sites and cities across Iran. The death toll in this strike that hit the girls' school in Iran has now officially surpassed 85. I'm hearing from sources in Iran that there's been a strike on some kind of a gym facility in another area of Iran where children have also been killed. The Iranians, unlike last time that Israel and the U.S. bombed, didn't wait to sort of absorb it and then come up with their own calibrated response. The Iranians have choreographed their retaliatory strikes through back channels with the U.S. in previous times.
Yeah.
We've been reporting for weeks they're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
In fact, we've had sources close to the power structure in Iran that have said that they understand that they're aiming to kill at least 500 American personnel in retaliatory strikes. So delegation to launch strikes was dropped down to a much lower command level in Iran. And that's why you saw an unprecedented simultaneous retaliatory response from Iran across all of these Gulf Arab countries. They also hit Jordan. A colleague of mine in Israel, who's in a bomb shelter right now, just sent me a message saying that the pattern of these strikes is unlike anything we've seen in previous attacks, and that the public instructions are to stay inside of those shelters much longer than ever before, during these retaliatory strikes from Iran.
Yeah.
Iranian naval vessels from the IRGC have been turning ships away at the Strait of Hormuz. To put a fine point on it, let's remember that the Democrats have seen this coming. And Hakeem Jeffries and Democratic leaders in the Senate as well refused to bring to a vote this war powers resolution. In fact, we reported at Dropsite that Chuck Schumer and others are cynically hoping that Trump does exactly what he's doing right now for two reasons. One, they actually support it. That's the most important thing to understand. It's a bipartisan consensus.
Absolutely.
They support it. They may not want to say it out loud. But then the other component is that they cynically believe that if it goes foul and wrong, remember, 70% of Americans don't want this war, that it's going to be on Trump and it's going to help their electoral chances. That's what you can distill this down into. They quietly want Orange Hitler to wage a war that they also want, and then they hope it kind of goes bad when he does it, even though they really want it to succeed, but they kind of hope it goes bad in the eyes of the American people so that it helps them. It's a win-win, and it captures in a nutshell the state of the institutional Democratic Party's posture when it comes to foreign policy.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the Ryan Grimm tweet here. It says, Jeffries, who held off a war powers resolution long enough for Trump to go start the war before it came to a vote, does not condemn Trump's attack in his initial response. The party leadership, as we reported last week, is eager to see Trump launch this war. I'm sure you've seen the House Minority Leader's statement on this supposedly unprecedented surprise attack that America and Israel conducted on Iran, that they were signaling that they were going to do as they launched an armada. 50%, more than 50% of our entire naval assets were moved into the region over the last month or so. And Donald Trump kept saying, just like he did in the build up to the 12-day war, that there was going to be a negotiations process. But it was very clear. It was so clear that I actually interviewed Ben Rhodes, former Obama administration national security advisor, about how these negotiations were simply a sham. Israel had kept adding on additional qualifiers to the negotiations, many red lines that they were simply designing so that, the Iranians would inevitably say no. What happened yesterday, however, was really interesting. The Omani official that went on television, I think, knew that this was probably going to happen. And that's precisely the reason why they were saying, no, Iran is actually totally on board with the negotiations and even leaning into maximalist demands that the American government was making on denuclearization, demands that were even more aggressive than the JCPOA, as far as taking out enriched uranium from the country and whatnot.
And by the way, I was told that there were actual direct talks between the U.S. and the Iranians, not just in this last round, but going back to February 6th in Oman. And the Iranians were saying that they had a sense that the Americans were even taken aback by some of what they were willing to put on the table. So, I talked to Rob Malley, who was on that negotiating team in 2015, an American official, former envoy to Iran under President Biden. And he said Trump could just call it a day and declare victory on this. He's just like knocking it out of the park compared to Obama in terms of what he's able to get out of the Iranians right now. If the issue is nuclear, they've got a victory here. But the thing is, the issue wasn't nuclear. The issue hasn't ever been nuclear. The issue is regime change. The issue is fighting Israel's wars for it. Was the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani at Baghdad airport in January of 2020, the head of the elite IRGC force of Iran. And when you read some of the reporting about it, and even sort of how Trump spoke about it at the time, it took a while for Trump to come around to that, and then ultimately he did it, and then he felt good about it. And Trump liked those kind of clean things. Oh, I killed Baghdadi, I killed Qasem Soleimani. But, in general, while Trump was a militaristic president, no doubt about it, in his first term, there was you got a sense that he was listening or sort of leaning more toward the direction of kind of the anti-interventionist, isolationist wing of the MAGA movement. And he kept the Israel firster Netanyahu neocon wing kind of a little bit at bay. He comes in this time, and again, the context is Joe Biden 50-year dedicated Zionist who facilitated the Gaza genocide with total enthusiasm, throughout his 4 years in power, and then Kamala Harris, who comes out and when she becomes the nominee and says, "There's nothing I would do differently than him," sets the stage then for Trump too. And I think one of the most telling moments is when he goes to the Israeli Knesset back in October, when he's on his way to declare he's secured the Gaza ceasefire at Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And he arrives in the Knesset, and it was sort of like a reverse Nuremberg trial, where the war criminals themselves are celebrating themselves and standing up and cheering one another. And he goes on and on about the kind of influence of Miriam Adelson, the late Sheldon Adelson's wife, and the single greatest bankroller of Trump's campaign. And he talks about her being the most influential, Israeli in the world. And I think that part of what's happened here is that led up to this is twofold. Trump now is completely in the service of the most extreme Zionist agenda in history. And then the other component of it is that these guys are all high on their own supply. You've got drinking buddy Pete Hegseth as the so-called Secretary of War. You've got little Marco trying to overthrow Cuba and the Venezuela thing. They kidnap Maduro, and Trump starts to sort of want it injected into his veins. And I was told that Trump and his people were saying, can we do another Venezuela in Iran? And he's hearing from intelligence and military people, it doesn't work that way in Iran. And he doesn't like some of what he's hearing from the military people. And he starts to understand that, Iran didn't go all in the last times that they've struck against us, that their ballistic missiles are actually pretty ferocious in some ways, that there are weak links in the Iron Dome system in Israel, that it can be overwhelmed, that U.S. bases can be hit, that you may, Mr. President, face a mass casualty incident involving American personnel. And the other thing is, Iran, for as much as people talk about the supreme leader, Iran has been building horizontal institutions since 1979. This isn't a commentary about any internal political issue. These are for Iranians to debate. I'm looking at this from a perspective of military intelligence. Iran is not Libya. Iran is also not Venezuela in the sense that you're just going to lop off the supreme leader and then say we're making a deal with the rest of you. So they now are in this war that is not in any way in the interests of the American people whatsoever. It's not in the interests of anyone in that region except Israel. The only conclusion we can draw is that Trump is fully purchased and bought into at the same time Israel's war of annihilations in the region.
Yeah. There's also this national security report from Reuters. Aaron Banco reports as a Reuters exclusive, the CIA assessed before the strikes that even if Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in the operation, he would likely be replaced by hardline figures from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And I've said this over and over again, that the Ayatollah himself is 87 years old. He is a zealot, but and therefore I think like martyrdom would probably be something that he looks forward to. But outside of that, there's also obviously like you said, a horizontal leadership structure. And within the Iranian forces, within the Politburo, within the political side of Iranian civil society, and within the IRGC, the Ayatollah is probably one of the more restrained elements, whether it be offering personal setbacks to the Iran nuclear program, or even the restrained nature in which Iran has refused to retaliate beyond some kind of retaliatory theater, as we talked about with Qatar. So if you take out Ayatollah, or even some of the top-line generals in the IRGC, which have become even hardliners from the last cleansing that took place in the 12-day war, you're going to have a group of individuals that are even less responsive to American negotiations. That's my speculation, and it turns out the CIA is saying similar things as well.
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple things I want to comment on that, but just to start with what you just said, I think that even is confirmable from the Iranian perspective, because what we've been told by sources is that they have a multi-layered succession system that they put into place at the time of the 12-day war. And it is true that a significant number of senior military figures who fell into a more moderate camp when it came to how should we be responding to attacks militarily by the United States and Israel, they're gone. And that's why you saw this almost immediate retaliatory response by Iran across the spectrum, and actually increasingly seems like they're going to start hitting targets in these countries in a real way. But on this issue of like, is someone from the IRGC going to take power? That's not exactly what we've been hearing from Iranian sources. That's not what has been reported from the Iranian side. It's newsworthy that that is the assessment that the CIA is making. But again, I think it goes back to Iran being a nation of institutions. Yes, it has a supreme leader, and that seems like a very foreign concept certainly to Westerners. But that doesn't mean that it's not a country of institutions. This is a highly advanced scientific society that is a society of institutions. I keep emphasizing that because it is not some, sort of banana republic somewhere where you just pluck out the dictator and everything comes crumbling down. The other part of it is, who are the ground forces that are going to come in to implement this thing? Pahlavi, he's going to raise an army? The MEK, this fanatical cult. You're going to have Kurdish forces, come in. The U.S. military advisors, they're telling Trump all of this stuff. They're painting pictures for him. And the Trump people kept coming back and looking for something clean. So what do we get in Trump's speech? We get Trump going out there, and it was like this weird hodgepodge potpourri of things I'm going to throw at you. Wow, the 79 revolution. Oh, they took our embassies hostage. Then he throws in, they were involved with the USS Cole bombing in Yemen in 2000, which was done by Al-Qaeda, sort of sworn enemies of Iran. He's just throwing everything at the wall. And then he's saying, after we are finished raining bombs down on you, but then you're going to seize the reins of power, which you've always wanted, and we're going to hand it over to you. It's as though it presumes that there is some strange, tiny cult that somehow is in charge of a nation of 90 million people, and that it's just a matter of killing the leaders of that. And then everybody comes out and says, oh my God, we want the Shah back in power. And, this is like fanciful thinking that from American perspective too, could well result in a large number of American deaths. Not to mention, they're blowing up girls' schools within hours of this thing starting. They blow up, and I'm sure the death toll is going to rise. They hit a girls' school. They're hitting sports facilities. That bombing, by the way, of that girls' school is as horrifying as some of the worst single bombing episodes that we've seen in Gaza. And they did it within hours. Of launching this thing on day one. And at the end of the day, the narrative from the US is that there's this Islamic Republic dictatorship that's holding a nation of 90 million people hostage. That's the dominant narrative. My sense is that Iran is a much more pluralistic society than that you have much sharper and nuanced degrees of how Iranians in general view the Islamic Revolution, the Islamic Republic government, what they want in their society. This isn't a case of two options where you either have, these secular, Western oriented Iranian diasporas who think that, who want to make sure that no one ever has to wear a hijab. And then on the other side, you have the mullahs. It's a ridiculous oversimplification that does a service to no one to think about. So that human dimension is something that almost never gets talked about. Iranians don't fall into two categories. You have people, even within the ruling state in Iran, there is great diversity of how people view what that government should be like, how they view its policies, including some of the favored policies to talk about in the West. There's great diversity of thought. And all I'm cautioning here is that let's say that the US and Israel are able to do unspeakable damage to the state in Iran. That doesn't mean that Iranians are going to en masse say, oh my God, thank you, Donald Trump. Now here we have X kind of government. That oversimplification is a total disservice, including to Americans who are trying to assess what they actually believe about these policies.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, by the way.